it's just so interesting how we think about software in a little bit of a different way than we think about labor and value and investment. And that's actually the big pricing experiment going on in the industry right now, which is as technology is enabling more of this outcome delivery, can pricing and packaging actually rise up to be measured and be perceived a lot closer to that customer value?
Welcome to another episode of the Supra Insider podcast. In this episode, Ben and I were joined by Alvaro Morales, who is the CEO and co-founder of Orb, a company that's building the modern billing infrastructure. They have some big name customers like Vercel, Perplexity, and Replit, and they're crushing it. Prior to Orb, Alvaro was an engineer manager at Asana for over 5 years. That's actually where we overlapped. We worked together in a bunch of teams, and I learned so much from him.
Alvaro shared with us why he started Orb after running up against all kinds of challenges and constraints with iterating on pricing and packaging at Asana. He talked to us about how the modern product teams, including the ones Marc just mentioned, are thinking about billing and pricing, and why unbundling pricing from the actual product features is allowing teams to move way faster than they would otherwise. And we got into a really interesting discussion about why outcome-based pricing is the holy grail of product pricing, but there's a lot of challenges around getting there, which we went into. And we also talked interestingly about how Orb's pricing came to be and the lessons that Alvaro shared with us from the early design partners and ultimately reaching the pricing model that works well today for all their customers. This was a fantastic conversation. And if you're a product leader or an engineering leader, or even a finance and business leader who's thinking about iterating on your company's pricing and being able to try a lot more, a lot faster, I think you'll get a ton of value from this conversation. So enjoy it.
Amazing. Welcome, Alvaro. So good to see you.
Great to see you too, Marc. Ben, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this.
And some quick context for the audience. So Alvaro and I used to work together at Asana. He's probably one of the smartest engineers that I ever worked with. And not surprising, he's building an awesome company at Orb because he always had a really strong product intuition. So it's been really cool to see him in this journey. And yeah, Alvaro, the first question that I have for you is that a funny trend that I've noticed with all of these AI tools is that they have the exact same pricing and packaging model for their like consumer app. You look at ChatGPT, you look at Claude, you look at Vercel, they all have that $20 a month subscription. I'm curious, like, one, why do you think that is? And then like, why is no one deviating from that?
That's a really good question. I don't know for this AI wave in particular, but what immediately came to mind was like early 2010s. Dropbox comes out with $9 a seat in their product. And soon after, a lot of their competitors, a lot of sort of, broad productivity related software really started to quickly anchor around that price point. So maybe what we're seeing is, off the top of my head, I think Notion was a first mover in this AI-powered application layer movement. They launched their Notion AI add-on, I believe at $20 a month on top of a $10 a month per seat motion. And I think they did it pretty quickly. They were, I think, one of the first to get their solution out to market. And you just see this kind of rapid anchoring and following around a price point. And I think that's something so deeply interesting about this world of pricing and packaging. When folks say it's an art and science, I think this is a great example. And it's obviously a science because I'm sure there's a lot of smart people that have done rigorous analysis to understand how does the cost of AI interface with my COGS and my cost structure. And let's make sure that this like fixed number is broadly above water in terms of some very high cost and high use customers and some low use, low cost customers. And I'm sure there's this is what a bunch of other people are doing, so we might as well follow along. And it's just interesting to reflect on how quickly those decisions catalyze, and then also how quickly they set a standard for the industry. One thing that I saw on X yesterday is that Devin, the AI software engineer, came out with their public announcement and launched, I believe, at a $500 a month price point. And then you look at related products, you look at a Replit agent, you look at even Claude and ChatGPT, and those are hanging out more than $20 to $40. So there's a lot of rapid anchoring of how is this sort of such different in price point. And so much of that is psychological, and that's what I love about pricing. And there is some numbers and math behind it, and then there's also a lot of perception and anchoring and value. You make a value statement and you put a stake in the ground based on the price point that you pick.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind when you just said that is the first question I ask myself is, wow, what is so much better about Devin that it's worth 500 relative to the other guys, right? Like even it's almost like by just making that pricing decision, they're planting some kind of seed of doubt that, man, am I using like the inferior product? Am I using the cheap thing? Is there a much better one that I should be using?
Look, I understand that there's a lot of value to be delivered, but even at $500 a month, we're talking about $6,000 a year when probably a fully loaded software engineer in a tier one market runs you several orders of magnitude higher than that. It's just so interesting how we think about software in a little bit of a different way than we think about labor and value and investment. And that's actually the big pricing experiment going on in the industry right now, which is as technology is enabling more of this outcome delivery, can pricing and packaging actually rise up to be measured and be perceived a lot closer to that customer value?
Yeah, and what do you think needs to happen for people to start seeing that connection? Like the other day, I was playing with an AI tool, actually specifically for helping us get faster with our podcast production, and something that usually maybe would take us 5 hours a week. Now with this new workflow, it takes us 5 minutes. And like that to me is like that value right there is like already probably like 500, 600, $1,000 based on my time. And I think still a stretch to put it like a full-time person, but yeah, like what do you think is preventing us from making that connection?
Human nature of undervaluing your time over your money. And that's the thing that we've always, I think, when you look at the amount of time you're spending on a particular low leverage task compared to you could pay some money to get that done for you, it's just is really hard to actually estimate the counterfactual of if I had saved time, how many dollars would I have gotten out? So I think it's a super interesting problem that's deep rooted in how we're hardwired, and I think a lot of smart people are trying to find a pricing answer, but I think the answer probably lies closer to some human psychology things.
Can I ask like what got you originally hooked into the pricing world? Because I love psychology, was one of my favorite classes in like high school and college. There's a lot of we've mentioned psychology a few times. Was it the psychology aspect that kind of got you originally hooked, or was there another moment that pulled you into this world?
I think what got me hooked was discovering that what I expected pricing to be was so radically different than what it actually turned out to be. I knew nothing about pricing going into my job at Asana right out of college, and I was super lucky to be there through their major growth phase. And I thought that pricing was all math. I'm going to walk in and see a whole bunch of Excel models and really complicated analysis, and we're going to optimize the heck out of a number, and that number is going to solve all our problems. And instead, I found that it's an incredibly customer-centric and product-centric discipline. It's about understanding what value you provide to your customers, who are you trying to optimize for, how do you connect where you want to take your business and strategy to what decisions you make on pricing. That discipline turned from like a hard math objective function optimization thing into a squishy, strategic, riddled with trade-offs type discipline. And I think I fell in love with that. And I found it so curiosity inspiring and challenging. And I think what I've learned time and time again over the years is that there really isn't a silver bullet with pricing. Whatever decision you make is going to bring with it some benefits, bring with it a lot of trade-offs. And the only thing that folks can really do is continually think about evolving, changing how they think about pricing, trying new things, keeping on top of a fast evolving market. So it's just a lot more of a dynamic, fluid thing rather than very static math-based disciplines. As a software engineer by background, and as somebody used to think in very objective, hard ways, I love this work.
I'm curious, how did you how did you learn all the things that you know about pricing, and how do you kind of continue like that learning journey? Because every time I hear you talking about pricing, I'm like, Alvaro has like a PhD in pricing, and I know you're an engineer by trade. So how did you get there?
I'd love to consider myself a student of pricing, nowhere near the PhD degree. It's interesting how these things come through, right? When I joined Asana out of college, my onboarding buddy set me up with a number of kind of one-on-one meetings with folks across the organization, and I was lucky to meet one of the product leads that owned pricing and packaging at Asana, and she shared with me a recommendations deck that the premier pricing consultancy in Silicon Valley had prepared for Asana. And it was like an 80 slide set of recommendations dissecting the business 15 ways left and right. I felt like through that, I learned more about our customers than I had across all the work and projects that I was directly supporting at the company. I spent a lot of time in growth engineering where our customers were these like numbers on a spreadsheet that would go up and down and will get optimized. Mark, you'll remember you and I many times in those trenches thinking through some interesting decisions. But I feel like the world of pricing taught me more about our customers than the world of product engineering, which is actually quite counterintuitive. And then it's these kinds of conversations where I think it's the favorite part of my job as the co-founder and CEO at Orb, where we're building billing infrastructure to help companies ship their pricing as fast as they ship their products. My favorite part of my job is that once we're past questions about features and requirements and whatnot, you get to tap into a real thing going on in the industry, which is some fear, uncertainty, and doubt around what the best practices are. And the cold hard truth is that the best practices around software pricing and packaging are getting defined and set every single day. And practitioners are incredibly hungry and open for community in terms of how to help them think through these problems. So I think I've just been lucky on the seat. We've been doing the company for 4 years now, and I've just been able to connect with all kinds of companies, business models, ideas, and I get to learn something every day.
Amazing. Maybe one quick follow-up there. So I'll make a parallel with Asana. I know like probably people come to you at Orb the same way that maybe like people came to Asana because like at Asana, they're like, hey, like my life is chaos. I know I need to get better at project management. Like people come to you at Orb thinking, I don't have a good like billing platform. I need to make pricing changes fast and I don't want to build that from scratch, right? And I think a lot of the challenges in that onboarding that we had at Asana was that people just did not know how to do project management, and they just hoped this tool will actually help them how to do it. But it was really hard because if you don't know the fundamentals, then it's hard to actually get value from this tool. And I'm curious, like, how do you think about like, the role that Orb plays in that education around pricing and packaging and like the things that we're discussing, user psychology, like how to announce price changes, things like that. Like what do you see the role of Orb being for those customers?
I think I aspire for us to be a real thought partner for our customers to go on this journey. Here's the thing about founding a company as an engineering founder that maybe you think about in theory, but then you have to live through some experiences to actually get it. As much as I like to think that we're in the business of software, where we're like developing the software product that we are selling to our customers, we're also a partner, and folks come to Orb wanting to get from point A to point B in some of the most sensitive and critical business transformations that they are undergoing. So whether it is a transition from a subscription-based pricing model to more of a consumption-based pricing model, whether it's a company that is launching a new AI product line that is kind of the value is delivered and the value is captured in an entirely different monetization model, or whether they've hit a certain level of growth that they now want to start prioritizing new segments of the market, and they have to redo their pricing and packaging. These are really scary transitions, and often for companies, they can be make it or break it. I think it is common knowledge when you hear about botched price changes, right? The company that essentially their CEO was fired or had to leave because the way that they announced the pricing change was terrible and the community riled up. You read the horror stories out there in the sort of media, but there's also a lot of success that you hear less about. So ultimately, unlike, say, marketing surface A/B testing or really large scale consumer product kind of A/B testing, what's at stake with pricing is the trust that you have and can create with your customers. And what that means is that you can't be cavalier and very rushed in how you approach pricing. So folks, I think, need to be really thoughtful and mindful about how they do things. Now, the problem though is that often leads to inaction, and it leads to like companies not touching their pricing and packaging for 5-6 years. Somebody asks like, why are things that way? And you're like, nobody remembers. What my goal with Orb is that folks can really start to think about shaping and evolving their pricing as fast as they evolve their product.
It's interesting because I'm putting myself in the seat of most of my pricing thought process these days is as a consumer. Like, how much do I pay for the things that I use? I do some pricing, like I have a Maven course that I'm continually trying to find the right price for that, and other things that I work with some founders on. But I'm curious, do you think there's like whiplash or risk with changing the prices for products too frequently, where it's almost like if some months Claude costs $21.78 and other months it costs 19 and other months it costs like 25? Do you think that those kind of swings in prices do they damage customer trust in any way? Or have you learned anything around customer or consumer appetite for these changes that might be surprising?
I think they absolutely can damage customer trust, particularly if it feels like there's no rhyme or reason to those changes. Consumers are incredibly savvy, and they have a ton of options. So that's one of the interesting things about this world of software pricing and packaging in this decade versus the previous decade, which is with the rise of competitive solutions and a bunch of alternatives, consumers have a lot of choice. So I think the risk of like just being frenetic and chaotic with your pricing and packaging strategy is you're going to thrash those customers, and they're likely going to look at the competition for where to go. There's a lot of mitigations and tactics around that, such as experimenting with pricing only on net new cohorts and thinking about doing a little bit of a cohort analysis to project and understand impact for the rest of the customer base. But all that said, I think what I found with our customers is that there are two things that are true time and time again. One is no amount of pricing, framework, sensitivity analysis, whatever, trumps just talking to your customers. Just actually getting on a phone with some of the humans that are getting value out of what you're building and asking them, what is that value? What value you perceive? How is this actually making an impact to your day-to-day? And then second is, with all that, what I just said about trust being on the line and all that, I think consumers are also quite resilient and adaptive. Change, when thoughtful, communicated well, purposeful, isn't always poorly received.
I'm curious, how do you, because it sounds like a lot of times people come to Orb because hey, like I know I need to make this change from tiers to maybe usage-based billing. And I understand that you guys do that hand holding and help them get there and think through like maybe all the edge cases, all the different like cross-functional pieces. But then after that point, like how do you think about teaching those like customers to fish? Because a little bit like you did the fishing with them, but then how do you teach them about the things that we just talked about of like doing the user research? Hopefully they're already talking to users, but how do you think about it? Like when to experiment with pricings? What are like the different dimensions or criteria you can experiment with? Yeah, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think customers come to Orb when they're up against one of three what we call monetization catalysts, which usually are a net new product launch, a significant pricing change, or a lot of growth in the horizon that is breaking their existing setup in place and they need a change. So they're seeking a solution and a partner that can help them realize that transition a lot faster and a lot more effectively than they would have continuing on the journey of either their in-house billing infrastructure build or a legacy vendor that just architecturally is not well set up to the level of flexibility that this decade demands. I think there's something interesting in the approach that we have as a product that almost enables customers to fall into that pit of success. So one of the observations that I had as an engineer was that the way software products are built around monetization is that they very tightly couple and hard code the way the product works with the way that the product is priced. And then when months later somebody asks this question of like, how about we change the price point and raise it a couple dollars? Or what if we go from 2 tiers to 3 tiers? Those types of exercise end up taking months and months. And in fact, I've many times had to be that uncomfortable engineering voice in the room telling folks on the product and business side of the company, that's a great idea for our customers, but it's just going to take us so long because we have to fundamentally rethink a lot of assumptions. The way we approach the space and problem with Orb is help our companies achieve this decoupling between the way that the product works and the way that they price. And we do this by asking them, please send into our platform the raw product usage data that your teams have instrumented to figure out how does your product work. And then inside of Orb, you get to achieve and configure how you want to price that. The benefit of that approach is that you get degrees of freedom on both sides. You can keep changing the product without worrying about the pricing, and you can change the pricing without having to go back to your engineering team that built those products. So what we're doing in reframing the billing category is trying to achieve a little bit of a transformative sale to encourage our audience to think about this problem in a different way and consider what are the possibilities of approaching this problem differently. And when they do, what we have found in our customers is that the rate of change and the frequency of experimentation goes a lot. It becomes a lot more frequent. And also, the reality is these competitive times with the challenging software economic macro demand folks to be a lot more agile and nimble about how they monetize. So flexibility on pricing is no longer just nice to have. It often becomes a company's competitive advantage and reason why they can be very successful.
It's so interesting because I'm thinking about the unbundling I think a lot of us have already accepted between something like marketing and product, where for many years it's been totally cool to let the marketing company own the homepage or all the ads, and then there's no connection between what marketing is doing and the product. And it sounds like that is going to now extend into pricing within the product, which feels so historically interwoven, where I'm almost imagining like features each having like a feature flag, and a feature flag is associated with a tier, and it's as long as you know which tier the customer's in, you can give them access to certain features. And what if you could tie that feature flag to like the price? And if it's like that's a whole different way of thinking about giving people access to features over time, or taking away features, or grandfathering people into certain features that maybe they don't want to pay the new price for, but you've just, so you guys have built the whole system that allows all of that configuration to happen by who's the primary person that is, just like on the marketing side, it would be maybe like the head of marketing or someone who owns like the website who runs all those experiments. Who have you found to be usually the champion or the decider that's orchestrating a lot of that unbundled pricing strategy?
Yeah, the main constituencies that we serve with Orb are the product, engineering, and finance teams. Historically, the main audience for a billing infrastructure product has essentially entirely been the finance team. And in that organization, driving 95%, if not more, of that purchase decision. The sort of trend and change that we are building Orb around is the fact that pricing is becoming a lot more about how the product works. So all of a sudden, that pricing and packaging discipline is less of a contracts back office type exercise and a lot more of a living and breathing product exercise. So Ben, one of the interesting things about what you were saying is I think Orb's goal and mission is to on the implementation side, make it such that our tools stop constraining and dictating how we price our product for our customers, because that is like way more common than unfortunately I'd like it to be. And it's incredibly painful that so many great businesses have historically been making pricing and packaging decisions just as a result of constraints from tools. So if Orb can have a little bit of a role in removing this implementation shenanigans from the picture, I think we actually have the opportunity to make the pricing and packaging work discipline accessible to a bunch of teams, because I think that's what needs to be incredibly cross-functional. Who owns pricing at an organization? It varies a little bit from organization to organization, but generally there's a committee that involves a number of perspectives across the product, customer, and business side. And the more that we can enable that cross-functional perspective to have a rich debate and a fast time to action, I think that's how we turn pricing and packaging into a center of excellence.
One quick follow-up is the roles and responsibilities, that kind of like intra-organization dynamic that you just described in that trend. Do you think it applies equally to companies that are doing like PLG self-serve product pricing and companies that do more upmarket enterprise, like white glove type deals? Or do you think that this way of behaving is going to end up coming out on top for one of those over, but maybe not the other?
I think it converges over time, and it's almost a question of where in this maturity curve does the discipline get flourished, because a lot of business, a lot of founders, myself included, usually begin our pricing journey with, let's charge that $20 a month mark, like where we began our conversation. That seems like a reasonable price point. And then over time, you're like, what if we doubled it? What if we like slashed it? And you like start randomly getting to a place. And then that's where you start incorporating the voice of the customer, your renewals data, your like sales data, and turn that completely swag exercise into a much more of a rigorous discipline. I think PLG companies, by virtue of the sensitivity and price that an on-ramp has and the numbers that they usually encompass, are probably forced to have that level of rigor a little bit earlier in the journey. Whereas you might think that your quote experiments in a sales-led growth model are cohorted based on the size of deals and the cohort of deals that you're signing in different quarters. And I think the industry still thinks through the way that you realize pricing and packaging for PLG versus SLG is almost like very differently. And I want to share an observation that is so prevalent and just so not obvious. Companies that do a PLG model, I think, are smart to invest early on in terms of a lot of a transparent customer experience around billing and monetization. So usually they have these amazing customer portals. Think AWS-like level of visibility in terms of actually being able to understand how much I'm consuming and how much I'm paying. But maybe they're paying $20 a month. And then you got your like $2 million a year enterprise customers that maybe get a meeting a quarter with a CSM that pulls up an Excel file that shows them like, I think here's roughly how much you've used. So it's almost like the folks that are investing more and you'd think getting more value out of the experience are getting a worse product and customer experience. And that makes no sense to me. And it's almost, I think if we can deliver that 11-star experience for a $5 customer versus a $5 million customer, I think that businesses that do that are smart to think through the impact to retention and benefits there.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it's like intentional to a point of like, you just don't want them to see, hey, like actually you bought like 2,000 seats, but maybe you're only using 1,000, or there's all these people that are maybe not that active that maybe you could cut. I almost wonder if there's the incentives for those sales-led companies are not there to be transparent.
I think maybe it's a different level of, the customer. You're right. It's a different set of incentives. But you know what we found time and time again from our customers, from talking to a bunch of folks, is that being transparent about pricing and packaging and about your pricing strategy isn't just like a capital B or capital G good thing to do from a I don't know, moral plane or whatnot, it often leads to stronger, more retentive customer relationships, because you end up in a place where you're showing up to that renewal call, not with, by the way, you might not know this, but you purchased this a year, your team purchased this a year ago, and here's roughly how they've been using it. You show up with, we know exactly what value this product is going to an organization, and we have confidence as to what the right decision to make is. So I think, are we overutilized? Are we overpaying and all of that? The buyers these days are very smart, and they're going to be doing that work for you, and they're going to be comparing you to the competition, and they're going to be making sure that every single step of the way you are the best fit for their business. And I think if folks think that's not happening in the customer base, they're going to be hit with a wave of churn.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like almost like I see parallels between the lack of transparency and the of sales-led worlds, where I almost wonder if part of it too is that's just how things have been done forever. So you almost like don't know what's possible, or that you could be a lot more transparent. And I think that's also connected to, for example, like PMs that have lived for a long time in a world where they don't have that much. They have a lot of constraints around pricing, right? Like the things they can do are very limited. Like for example, I remember a lot of those conversations at Asana be like, oh, like that's a cool idea, but it's going to take 9 months to just do this huge change. So how can, and I almost wonder when people then move to a company where they have a platform like Orb, right? Like all of a sudden, you have so many possibilities, but the problem is that you're probably still operating from a world of like constraint and scarcity. So like, how have you found that or what has been helpful for some of those like PMs or product leaders to start to think more creatively around pricing, given their past experiences?
So I don't know. And we're trying a bunch of things. We're trying sharing of best practices and spotlighting customers that have been amazingly successful in this journey. And I think it brings some momentum to the machine and gets some gears going. But time and time again, sometimes folks just need to get a win and experience what's possible there, and that sets off a new behavior. What I mean by that is sometimes you're launching a big new headline product and you're working on a monumental rewrite of the product to achieve a lot of goals. And then sometimes you're just like tweaking pricing and packaging, and that activity can be one of the most impactful activities to revenue of the company that year. So as much as I and Orb were like hoping to get more of a movement around there, still early innings, and sometimes folks just need to get a little bit of a win. But when you get that win, it feels so great because you have aligned price to value, you've made your customers more successful, and you've made your business more successful. So this is about as aligned a set of incentives as it can get.
I'm curious. One of the things, because we were talking about like tweaking pricing, playing with pricing, introducing tiers. Are you seeing anything interesting in the whole like freemium like tier? Are freemium tiers still as popular and useful in your view as they were back in the day? Or are we starting to see them phased out in favor of more like full-blown product experience with put your credit card and you get a trial period, and if you don't want it at the end of the 14 days, you just lose access to everything? Are you seeing, what are you seeing happening in that space?
I've definitely seen that rise of the reverse trial, that experience you're describing, if you get like the best possible level of service and level of product as your first impression, and then you get to make the investment decision having experienced that, as gaining more popularity than purely the freemium model. The challenge with freemium is that the incentives are a little bit messed up in terms of long-term customer value, right? The benefits of freemium is you have this low or no barrier to entry situation where folks can just dive right in and get started, start getting value of the product. But I think as a business, to sustain your innovation, you also have to monetize it effectively. So you often start to think about, what can I carve out that is really valuable from my core product for it to not be in kind of that free experience, to encourage and incentivize folks to do that upgrade. But in doing so, you've made your product experience worse because you've chopped off and carved out a piece of functionality that maybe could have led a customer to the aha moment. And I think that's one of the challenges with freemium, which is you can either put too much in there, put too little, and nobody upgrades. You can put too little and nobody converts, and it's just a little bit of a set of backwards incentives. Whereas with the more reverse trial motion, you get to put your best foot forward, and you get to hopefully dazzle and inspire new customers with the best that you can offer, and then you can be you can have them be more informed at the point where they are making the decision of what level of service is best for them.
Yeah, the most recent experience I had with that latter model was with, I guess technically it's freemium, but it's also what you're talking about with the latter. But Marc sold me on Claude projects, and I went to use Claude, and I realized I could not use projects unless I upgraded. And my experience with Claude has been primarily based on, like, the reason it's wowing me is because of the use of projects. But I played with its chat feature, and its chat feature wasn't that differentiated from ChatGPT in its own. So I'm guessing they had to make a very deliberate decision that we're not going to let people even get one project for free to get the value of Claude. But I do wonder if they would actually convert a lot more people to Claude if they gave away one project for free, showed people how much they can do with one project, and then said, "Hey, like, you want more projects? You should pay for this." That would have gotten me to the aha moment faster, probably.
I agree. I'm a daily active on Claude, and it's just interesting how how different the first impression versus the level of success that I feel I'm experiencing as a Claude user is right now. So I think it's an interesting space of opportunities there. As you were describing that, Ben, I think the company that has been most, I think, bold and forward with this set of tactics is ClickUp. I don't know if you've ever come across their pricing and packaging strategy back in our Asana days, Marc, in the work management space. Certainly we saw ClickUp. They've built a lot of offerings and products, and I think their base tier gives you like 2 of this, 1 of this, 3 of this, and almost like the full menu buffet where you can sample and get some hors d'oeuvres and then see if you want to like actually sit down for a meal type of thing. And the reason why I call it bold is because it brings a discrete unit of value literally to like the single digit feature limits of things that you do, but it gives a lot of folks the ability to experience the full set of full value of the product. So as more and more of these compound startups are getting built that are about, can you go for a consolidation play? Can you bring a lot of workflows into one place? I think we're going to start seeing a little bit more itty bitty pricing and packaging strategies too.
And Alvaro, I know you work with, every time I look at your website, I'm like, all the cool kids are like basically using Orb. I see like Vercel, Perplexity, and I'm sure there's others that I don't know as well, but they're doing really interesting things. Like, who's really impressing you in terms of, and maybe you don't have to share names, but like of how they're doing their pricing and packaging, and how they're thinking about first principles, and what are some trends you're seeing that, oh, that's really exciting and really smart?
I think there's 2 things. One is some of the most successful companies and most successful customers of Orb, I think, really embrace the change management aspect that the platform and solution bring. It's not just like a different software product that is helping you with your billing, but it's rather you are refining your pricing and packaging approvals process. You're saying, hey, product teams, you're responsible for instrumenting usage of your product that needs to follow this data schema so it can be compatible with the way we price other products. And then you have a little bit of a release cycle or like a product development process where you go through a period of you instrument and send some product usage data before you figure out how you price it. So there's almost like an emerging, call it like software development lifecycle thinking in the world of pricing and packaging that comes about. And I think the organizations that embrace this as a transformation and as a more agile way to shipping great product that also is monetized very effectively, I think take on that transformation. And second, the kind of change is constant. We spent a bunch of time at the beginning of this year building a capability that we call versions and migrations. So if you think about just a billing system from the outside, math calculator with bells and whistles that helps you make sure that every month your invoices are accurate. So automation is a core job to be done in this space. Orb is very excited about the job around orchestrating change and helping you evolve your strategies. So we spent a bunch of time at the beginning of the year building a capability called versions and migrations that lets you have different versions of pricing plans or offerings to customers, maintain customers on legacy versions, get new ones on future versions, and in a matter of a couple clicks, actually be able to roll out a full-blown price change migration that becomes effective on the rolling contract start dates of customers. As I'm describing this, I'm sure some of the listeners are going to be reminded of, oh, that last price change I got to do. There was a big long spreadsheet. I had a calendar reminder every single day to go in and punch in some buttons and make that price change. We automated that job to be done and made it really possible through automation. That feature and product has received a level of pull and adoption that has blown us out of the water, where we were like, okay, this is going to be helpful for that kind of once a year price change that some companies do. But I think we're just finding that when tools don't get in the way, I think folks are inspired to try more things out and make more changes. And I'm really delighted and excited about the level of adoption that we're seeing with that set of capabilities that actually help customers change and evolve their pricing.
I'm so curious. First of all, I took a look at your pricing page and it's excellent. So I would say if people want inspiration, looking at the pricing page of a pricing company is a really good idea.
You know what I really want to do? This is an idea I haven't pulled off yet. But when you think about a company like Orb, I think one of the biggest marketing assets can be our pricing page. So I have this idea I haven't yet pulled off, which is, what if there could be like an annotations toggle or something like that, where all of a sudden you see all the thinking that went behind all these decisions and you start seeing explanations or alternatives considered. That's one of the projects that I'm working on with our marketing team that hopefully will share some of that thinking.
It's almost like you anticipated my question, because my question was going to be, how did you land on your pricing? Like, how did you figure out what the right pricing structure is for Orb?
I think a lot of probably a journey that is common for a lot of folks, which is some category competitive anchoring coupled with some iteration and evolution on working with customers. We were really lucky to work with a set of very engaged and amazing early design partners with the product. And as you might imagine, when it was my co-founder and I starting this company, we would go to these successful companies and what we were asking them to do is to trust us with their entire revenue pipeline on this like new startup that we're building. As you might imagine, we got a lot of no's. And when we were in the middle of that, as an entrepreneur, that's challenging. You're getting a lot of rejections. And it took us a bit to realize that a lot of those no's were not because, no, I'm not experiencing this pain point. No, I don't feel this on a day-to-day basis, but rather, no, this is an important problem. And it's like two guys with a slide deck, and this is a little bit of a high trust area. So we're incredibly lucky to get to build this company off of a set of really engaged design partners that invested not just their money, but their time in helping us be successful. And they're still customers to date. This is a very common tactic. Founders build companies with a set of very engaged design partners. And what I have found is that they immediately think that because they saw you from very early days, or because you gave this an amazing sweetheart deal or $0 price for your solution, they're automatically like a biased sample data point that you can't get insights and get survey out of. Whereas actually in reality, these are folks that probably have gone on this journey the closest with you and can give you a lot of rich insights about what value you are delivering and how you should price. So what I find and recommend is that those like heavily engaged users that maybe came on board before you had the current iteration of pricing and packaging can be really inspiring sources of data and ideas to help you converge towards that pricing strategy, even if maybe because you gave them a sweetheart deal, they're not going to be able to have the willingness to pay that some net new customers will.
One quick follow-up on that is, do you think that, assuming you do a great job of building trusted like mutually beneficial relationships with those first design partners. Let's just say for the sake of round numbers, you got 10 of them before you do some kind of big rollout to strangers. How much can you take those design partners at their word for if they say this is worth X number of dollars to them? And there's a bunch of different ways of getting to what that number is, but have you come to believe that there is a way of asking those questions that actually does turn out to be pretty aligned with reality when when you ask them to get their wallet out and they do pay you?
I think so if what you are taking from those insights is not precisely correct, but rather a directional input to where you should go. So I think if you want that cohort of folks to be the ones that actually are going to tell you that $20 a month for your AI add-on is the right thing to do, I would question the reliability of that survey. But if you start understanding frequency of use, outcomes delivered, if you start understanding value perception and asking them like, does this value metric feel like the right one? I think that's where really a lot of the art comes to be there. And the other thing that's interesting about those early customers is it depends on where the fundamental risk to the business lies. So there's categories of products where the risk is almost like a technology risk. Is this thing possible? Can this thing be achieved? There are other set of businesses where the risk is on the monetization model. If we were to do this, can anybody pay? And so doing what I just described of like having this kind of engaged set of early design partners that maybe are not paying you very much is not the best tactic to try to de-risk a willingness to pay type equation, right? So I think there's some important kind of context and type of business where if the biggest risk is the monetization strategy, maybe you should figure that out before a single line of code in the product is written.
Yeah, one of my favorite questions I learned from one of the co-founders of Attentive when I was working there is asking customers or prospective customers, what would need to be true for you to pay X dollars for this? And usually you put some kind of date on the offer. So we're doing this program starting on this date. We have a limited number of spots. It's going to cost this much. What would need to be true for you to say yes? And you ideally want to try to anchor that price higher than what you think they'll say yes to. Because what I found is assuming good intent in the conversation, they're actually open to the thing. They'll just start telling you, yeah, what would need to be true is I would have to have this, and I'm really skeptical that you could do all that. But theoretically, if all that was true, then it would be like a rational decision for me to want to pay you that. I feel like those are such revealing questions. So just a little thing for the audience in case they want to try that.
They absolutely are. And here's the other thing about that kind of design partner motion. You're often at a point of scarcity as an entrepreneur where you're like, if anybody wants this, can I get one human being to want this? Like, I'll take them type of thing. But you actually have a lot of power in the selection of which of those customers that you're choosing to go on a journey with, because some of those might want to go on the journey you want to go on, and it becomes a mutual partnership. And other folks, particularly if they're like amazing logos that would just be a dream to put on the website, might just have a little bit of a different viewpoint or perspective. So as tempting as it might be to say yes to everything, a little bit of rigor and thought as to what journey you want to go on as a product builder and what you want to optimize for ends up being really important. And I think that's really evergreen advice for the product discipline when it comes to private beta customer selection or even user research feedback sessions. There's a lot of results are dictated by who you have some conversations with. So I think as product builders, we don't get to be like the Gallup poll that like samples a random set of Americans on political views. We actually are craftspeople that get to think through who do we want to engage and what do we want to learn.
Yeah. And I think one of the hardest things too is like firing. I think, yeah, like in the beginning before you've chosen someone is a little bit easier. But then the hardest part is like when you've committed to someone and then like halfway through, you're like, oh shit, like I don't think you're the right person. And I think that conversation is a lot harder for either pilots or existing customers. But I think it's so important because otherwise I feel like inertia can just kill you.
Absolutely.
Another thing that's interesting, or I've done some sales now for the last couple of years, and I've like, been studying sales pretty intensely too. And I've noticed like the shorter sales cycles are where you can really connect very closely the price to either like, you know, the top line or the bottom line, right? Either you're this is going to save me X amount of money, or this is going to help me make, you know, X amount of more money. And I think we're seeing the pricing world starting to get closer to that and closer to that value, like with usage based. Okay, if you have 2 automations, that maybe saves you 5 minutes, whatever. But to me, like the ultimate like true test of value is almost like outcome based, right? Because then you actually can make that outcome the thing that you look like revenue or yeah, time save, etc. So I'm curious, like, why are we not seeing more of those like outcome based pricing? And maybe just to give an example to the audience, like for example, let's say like I'm doing like some sales prospecting tool, right? Like and a good outcome be like, hey, I would pay like $500 if you can get me like, you know, 40 calls booked with like people in my ICP.
I think it's because nobody knows how to do it. So this is the great experiment that's going on in the industry right now, which is how can you realize or approximate true outcome-based pricing to most directly connect the value that you deliver to the price that you charge. It's a hot topic of conversation, active area of exploration. I think a lot, if not all, companies are thinking through how could they connect their product and pricing strategy to outcomes. I have yet to see it pulled off outside of the customer experience, customer support category, where I think Intercom really deserves that first mover credit there. Zendesk AI followed in terms of they charge 99 cents per resolution of a customer ticket. So rather than like volume of incoming tickets, you're actually delivering value if you were able to successfully answer a customer support request without having to fall back to your support team through the help of the AI and automation. That's a measurable outcome that's really tangible. And I think those products are starting to see that there is appetite in the consumer space to purchase product in that way. It's just really hard to think about how to do it outside of that. I think, Mark, in the example that you're describing, why $40 instead of 50, or why like the 10 leads versus 15 leads? I think we're still trying to wrap our heads around how to think through paying for performance and budget and outcomes. I actually connect it to ad tech. If you're running an ad campaign, you're making this budgeting decision of, do I want to spend $5 a day or $500 a day on the campaign? And I'm going to make that choice based on some expectation of performance and outcome. But you're thinking about it as a slider of budget that you can assign to a campaign that you're running. And I think we just have to get comfortable as buyers of software with this sort of sliding scale of results. Right now, it's which model is better. Some models cost more than others. I think that's easy to wrap your head around, even if you don't understand the details of why those models cost more than others. But I think there's still a big wave to come in terms of more mass market categories. And here's the thing. Early cloud, beginning of SaaS, nobody knew how to procure or purchase seat-based software. Now it's become a standard. So I think you also take a little bit of a zoom out view, and as much as there is change and uncertainty right now, we don't know where the future is going to take us, but it's going to take us somewhere.
What I learned, just a plus one, I think what you're saying is when we did a bunch of research when I was at Attentive talking to marketing teams at a bunch of e-commerce companies, and they all have like budgets in mind for how much they want to spend to acquire new customers. But there is a way to frame the conversation where you get them to say they have unlimited budgets. And the way they get there is to say, what kind of return on ad spend are you looking to have? And they'll like, if I can get 2 or 3x like of sales for every dollar in ad spend, that's fantastic. I was like, what if you can guarantee 4x? What would that do for your overall budgets? And they're like, at 4x return on ad spend, you should just assume we have unlimited budget. Like we will infinitely spend on that channel. And so I do wonder if there's a way if like traditional SaaS or more like different kind of software is going to end, to Mark's point, like anything that, I don't know if it's as true for like bottom line like cost savings, but like maybe it's going to be true. But I think if you could pour more money into something that is only going to cost that if it also generates some multiple on that in revenue, then theoretically you should stop thinking about budgets, right? Unless you're worried about cash flow issues. But
And there, with that ROI, things pay for itself. I think that's what's really captivating, because you end up with a pricing and packaging strategy that more closely approximates that true willingness to pay factor. An interesting framework that I used to think about pricing is, it's a little bit mathy. If you think about a true value curve that represents what is the actual value that your customers get at different levels of investment, license-based pricing, like on-prem software type of thing, is the crudest approximation, where you like draw a line somewhere in that graph and you're like, that's the set pricing point. Then you got your seat-based pricing, which is a little bit like starts to approximate that curve by being chunked in units of seats. Then you get usage and consumption-based pricing that maybe is like a smoother approximation of that curve. It's not quite the actual value that you're getting, but you're measuring it indirectly and hoping to proxy it. And then outcomes, I think really what's inspiring and exciting about this way of thinking is that maybe it's the most direct approximation of the true value and true ROI. So I think we're on this journey of like smoothing that out and trying to approximate and get closer and closer to really that discrete unit of value, so that hopefully conversations about sales and purchasing can be less about asymmetric negotiation, end of the quarter incentive tactics, and a lot more like true value to consumers, which I think is going to be more fair and flexible.
And feel free to say you cannot answer this question, but how are you thinking about like that future and how you're developing your roadmap for Orb? Is that something that's top of mind?
I think we're excited to think about how we can help customers better predict what their spend might look like. So I think the number one objection in any form of usage-based pricing strategy is like, whoa, how can I budget for it? Like, you're telling me that your pricing is variable, there's a slider. So when I'm signing this check, I don't know if I'm signing this check for $10 or $10 million.
Yeah, that's super scary.
It's super scary, right? It's not how procurement and Office of the CFO teams are used to procuring software. But I think folks get a lot of predictability with more of a pre-commit credit model that I think is becoming really popular in the space of B2B. I don't exactly know how much I'm going to use, but I'm willing to budget $10,000 for this year and see how far that takes us. Those like sales conversations become a lot more sophisticated and a lot more around estimation and like helping folks think through what is a conservative versus aggressive scenario of how my spend might look like. And I think if you think about Orb as this single source of truth that can uniquely connect every unit of product usage to revenue and make it accessible to every team, I think we have the opportunity to really help with that hurdle and bring a lot more data and visibility to both sides of that value exchange to help them feel confidence in the decision that they're making.
Alvaro, I feel like we could continue asking you questions for a long time, but just two final questions before we wrap. The first one is, where can people find you or Orb?
Absolutely. Folks can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm Alvaro Morales on both. You can learn a little bit more about Orb at withorb.com. And one of the things that we're always very excited about is to have conversations with folks about how they're thinking about their pricing strategy and what are some of the big set of pricing possibilities that they're thinking through. So if anybody in your listeners has found this conversation interesting and sparked some thoughts, I would love to personally connect with them.
Amazing. And is the best way at LinkedIn for that, or just like your contact page with Orb?
Yes, it can be LinkedIn, and you can also email me at alvaro@withorb.com.
Amazing. And then we touched on this, but any other way our audience can be helpful to you or your company?
There's a lot of change and a lot of new ideas. And there is a tight-knit community of practitioners that is forging the future in how they're pushing their teams to think about what's possible when it comes to pricing and packaging. And I think that community understands that the decisions that you make about pricing and packaging dictate product success as much as the sort of scoping, feature design, solution trade-off decisions you make as a product builder. Because there's nothing worse than you creating a lot of value that can't be delivered to the customer because you've set too high a bar of friction when it comes to your pricing strategy. I think I'm really inspired to imagine what this is going to look like in a few years. And I think there's going to be a handful of experts and folks that are really going to be setting a standard for everybody else through that. So I think the Supra community is excited to engage in discussions about pricing. I'm all ears.
I'm sure we'll take you up on that. Alvaro, thanks so much. This has been an awesome conversation.
Thank you both. I really enjoyed this.
Thanks, Alvaro. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Mark a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.